Funding for this program is made possible by Burke Nursery and Garden Center in Burke, Virginia. You'll find trees and shrubs, perennials and annuals, water garden supplies, houseplants, and bird and gardening supplies. Burke Nursery also provides landscape, plant diagnostic, and installation services, and much more. For more information, you can check out their website or call 703-323-1188. Welcome to Gardening with Burke Nursery, the show where we help you grow your garden, increase the curb appeal of your yard, and share information on all plants. I'm your host, Misty Kuceris, the horticulturalist at Burke Nursery and Garden Center. Every year when it's planting season, I hear the same thing. What can I plant that the deer won't eat? So welcome as I talk about one of my favorite topics, deer-resistant plants. Consider these for your garden. Deer are everywhere. They walk through my yard as if they're on patrol. The elders bring their young and teach them the territory. And while I talk about deer-resistant plants, the truth is, if they are hungry enough, they'll eat whatever is available. I've even seen them eat dried leaves in the winter months. Still, there are many plants, both annuals and perennials, which aren't favored by deer. So take time to consider some of the plants I'll discuss today. And as in my last show on deer-resistant plants, I can't cover them all, but these plants will give you a great start to a deer-less eaten garden. So let me begin with one plant that may actually surprise you, which is the Coleus. The Coleus is a shade plant. It is an annual plant. And what that means is that it basically is a tropical plant that cannot thrive or survive the winter months here in our area, but in our area being, of course, Northern Virginia. But they also, in addition to making wonderful outdoor annual plants, they also actually make wonderful house plants. Now, Coleus, there are so many hundreds and hundreds of different types. For example, this Coleus over here, it is almost just pure one color. It is red, and depending on how the light glitters on it, it has some gold that kind of comes through the leaves. The other plant, or another Coleus here, is what I call a large leaf Coleus. And this Coleus has the red in the middle, and it has the green on the edges. And then this Coleus I like to call the frilly Coleus, because the leaves look like little frills. And the Coleus colors can be green, they can be red, they can be burgundy, they can be white. They do flower. And when they flower, it's kind of a cross. They flower in the summer. And it's kind of a cross between a flower that you may see on this Astilbe, which is a spike, and a cross between this flower that you may see on the Veronica, the Speedwell. So it has a little bit more of these little florets, but a little less of these florets here. And I don't remember if I said this, so I'll just repeat myself if I did. Part of the reason that the Coleus makes a good house plant is that it needs to be planted in part shade. So this is definitely a plant to consider for your shade garden. Now, another shade-loving plant is known as the sweet woodruff. And the sweet woodruff is a ground cover plant. It's a woodland plant. And it actually is not native here, but it does get these beautiful little white flowers in the early spring, which is good because what that means is that it's a wonderful pollinator for the time period of the early spring. So in April and May, you can look in your shade garden and you can look at the woodlands and you'll see all this beautiful white. And after the flowers are gone, you have these incredible, wonderful little leaves that give you a lot of interest. The one thing that because it's a ground cover, it grows about 6 to 12 inches tall. And this is true actually with all ground covers. You need to be very careful because with ground covers, they can be invasive. So you need to really watch to make certain that it doesn't take over your shade garden. So think of it this way. This is a great plant for a shade butterfly garden. It's a great plant as a ground cover. And the other, though, it is not drought tolerant. Because it's a woodland plant, it does need a lot of moisture. So that is your sweet woodruff. The next plant is a native plant, and this plant is the spiderwort. And so the spiderwort plant is, actually it's really interesting as to why the spiderwort is named what it is. It is said that this plant is not only native, but in addition to being native, actually being a medicinal plant. And that if you get bit by a spider, some people get this irritation when a spider bites them, then you take one of the leaves and you crush the leaves and you put it on that spider bite, and it's supposed to alleviate the spider bite. So hence the name. It gets these beautiful, what you might want to call fuchsia flowers. The flowers can also be blue, they can be white, and it kind of, in some ways, with the foliage, looks like a daylily. Doesn't that look like a daylily to you? And while this plant, you may find this confusing because sometimes you'll look at this plant and it'll say it's a sun plant. Other times it'll say it's a shade plant. Well, this will work in the sun, but it actually prefers to be in the shade. The other thing that's fascinating about the spiderwort is that it has no nectar. What that means is that butterflies don't like this, but bees love the plant. So it's still a pollinating plant, but it's not a pollinator when it comes to butterflies or moths or anything along those lines. So the next one that I'd like to talk about, and the one thing I did forget to mention, I mentioned this with the Coleus, but I did forget to mention with both the sweet woodruff and the spiderwort, these plants are perennial. And what perennial means is that they come back year after year after year. And you may have figured that out when I was saying be careful with the sweet woodruff because it can be invasive. But when it comes to the spiderwort, that is not considered an invasive plant at all. And because of the way it grows, and it's, I'm going to move this, well, I don't know. But basically, there are several stalks, just like you would see, as I mentioned, with a daylily. And so what happens is that it grows by putting up more and more of these stalks as it spreads underground. So that means every 3 years or so, it really helps if you divide this plant in the springtime when it's first coming up. That way you'll end up with a lot more spiderworts. And another, besides the color of the flowers that are different, some of the spiderwort plants have the green leaves like this one, and then some of them have what I call variegated leaves. And variegated leaves means that it's both white and green with running through here. So I don't know if I mentioned this, but the bloom time is May, and that's, again, an early bloom time. And still, the bees love it. So it provides a lot of sustenance for the bees. And also, the leaves are green or the leaves are variegated, which means that they're green and white or they're green. It's a beautiful addition to your garden. Now, the next one is not a perennial. The next plant is an annual. And this annual plant, Ageratum, this actually comes from Mexico. It's not native to us, but I just really like the flowers. And I'm going to just put this way. And if you look at the flowers, these here are the little flower buds. They look like little dots. And then you have the actual large flower here. And in a lot of ways, that looks like almost like a little pincushion. And these flowers like to cluster. And these flowers can either be blue, they can be pink, they can be white. Blue is the most common, and blue is actually also the most popular. This can grow anywhere from 6 to 24 inches. I don't really see the tall ones a lot in this area. Instead, I see the 6-inch ones. They work beautifully in pots. They are drought tolerant. What does that mean? Once they're in their happy place, they can handle the lack of rain. As a matter of fact, if they get too much rain, that doesn't make them very happy. And sometimes my recommendation is if you plant this in a pot and you hear that there's going to be too much rain, then move the pot so the pot doesn't get too much rain. While it is a sun to part shade plant, it really prefers the sun. So it's just the happiest when it has the sun. Oh, and another thing too, we talk about pollinator gardens, of course, and whether these are good in a pollinator garden. And one of the things you may want to tell your kids is that when you see a flat flower, butterflies like flat flowers. It's easier for them to get to the top of the flower. And so this is a wonderful, wonderful plant for a sun pollinator garden, a part shade pollinator garden. Butterflies just really love it. And then I talk about butterflies a lot, and this next plant that I want to show you is one that's called fairy wings. And so fairy wings is not a native plant, and it also blossoms in the springtime, but it's just a wonderful addition to the garden. And the flowers are so delicate. They are so, so, so delicate flowers, just unbelievable. And so they do look like little wings. The leaves look like wings, the flowers look like wings, and you can't tell it quite this time of year or with these flowers, but the flowers are actually bicolored. What that means is they have some white in them, they have some lime in them, they have a tinge of pink in them. And this is a perennial, meaning theoretically it comes back every year, but in point of fact, this particular one, and this one is the domino, fairy wings domino. This particular one is actually an evergreen. That means that throughout the winter months, the leaves stay green. And this is also, there are some that are what I call deciduous, but the large majority of them are evergreen. And they grow anywhere from 12 to 24 inches. And these are also a woodland plant. So they prefer partial shade to shade. And I didn't realize, but a lot of the plants that I brought today, deer-resistant plants to show you, actually are a lot that are in the shade garden. And that works well because when you see the deer trotting through, they're trotting through because they're going through the woodlands just like everybody else. Because it's a woodland plant, it does like morning sun. It'll take some dapple sunlight. That means that the sun comes through the actual trees. And what's really interesting, most of your woodland plants, because the woods are moist, the roots hold in moisture, most of your woodland plants need a lot of moisture when you plant them in a garden further away from the wood line. This plant, though, is a drought-tolerant plant. It's one of the plants that is just totally drought-tolerant. Now what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk about one of the most favorite annual flowers. And in honesty, a lot of people think that they're perennials, but the ones that you'll find, at least here on the East Coast, are usually the annuals. On the West Coast, Midwest, there are some of these that are perennials, and these being zinnias. Zinnias are just phenomenal. They can grow anywhere from 6 inches to 36 inches. Yes, they can grow as tall as 3 feet. They are totally drought tolerant. They are wonderful when it comes to creating a cutting garden. And because of the flat tops, just like some of the other plants that I talked about, butterflies love them. In addition to butterflies, hummingbirds like them as well. And the reason I say they seem to a lot of people to be like perennials, because people tell me, well, what do you mean this zinnia is an annual and it might not come back? This seed head has so many seeds that when it comes out in the fall time, when it starts dying back in the fall time, then what happens is that it goes to seed, and you can either let the seeds fall into the ground, or if you want, you can actually take the seeds, put them in a baggie, put that baggie in a cool, dry place so the seeds don't get moist and get too wet, and then come spring, you can go and you can plant those seeds in your garden. Or what some people will do is some people will actually take the seeds and just toss them all the way around. And the one thing that I didn't mention about annuals is the reason people like annuals is that annuals will tend to bloom spring through fall until they're killed by the first frost. The perennials have an actual bloom time. So you have your spring blooming perennials, you have your summer blooming perennials, but the annuals, they give you that show and that splash of color, especially zinnias. There are so many different colors of zinnias. I've brought a pink one here, I've brought a yellow one here. There are orange zinnias, there are white zinnias, there are so many I can't even remember how many all there are. But that gives you a lot to choose from. The other thing, if you want to make sure with your zinnias, and this is true too with the Ageratum, is that you want to do what we call deadhead. And deadhead simply means that you take a pair of scissors or a pair of garden clippers, and when the flowers are spent, when they're done, with the case of the zinnia, you just go down that whole stem, and then you cut that flower off. I could cut it off actually at these leaves, but in point of fact, I would cut this over at the lower leaves because I would like this to stay bushy. So that's basically what deadheading means, is that you just cut them at the stem when they're done. And I just have memories of my mother and I walking around the neighborhood where she would see some zinnias, or she would see a couple other of the flowering annuals, and she would see that the flowers had gone past their prime, and she'd collect them. And then she would collect the seeds from those dead flowers. And this is going back a little ways to the Ageratum, but this is also a plant that will last longer if you deadhead it. And so basically what that means with the Ageratum, what that means is that flower will turn black when it's done. Don't worry, it's not a disease, it's just the way the flower is. And then what you would do is, again, the stem is smaller here, but you would take your scissors or your garden clippers and you would just basically cut at the base. Now, another plant that I like is the Veronica. And the Veronica, also known as the Speedwell. That's because this is one perennial that blooms from spring all the way into fall. And the flowers are just, they're fun. They're purple, they're blue, they're white. This is a plant that is native and it just loves the sun. There's not a lot that you have to do with it. As with anything, it does help once these flowers run their course to, again, deadhead them, to clip them off. But they are so profuse. I mean, they just keep coming. They keep coming. These little flowers become this big flower, and it just keeps going on and on and on. Just a wonderful plant to have. And the other thing is that this plant, once established, is also drought tolerant. And I talked about the flat heads of the other flowers, like your Zinnia having a flat head and butterflies liking it. Well, this has so much nectar that even though it's a spiky flower, the butterflies just totally love this. And this is not for the faint of heart if you want a small border garden, because this can get as tall as 4 feet. This one, though, the one I have here is actually a short one. This one is only going to get to 12 inches to 1 foot. But there are other varieties that can get to 12 feet. I'm sorry, not 12 feet, can get to 4 feet. 12 feet's a little bit too high. And another plant, which is native, is your pincushion plant. And butterflies love this. Hummingbirds love this. You can find it in the pink flowers, the lavender flowers. They come in red flowers. They come in burgundy flowers. This is a full sun plant. And usually your full sun plants can tolerate drought. Not so much with the pincushion. It really wants to have moist soil. So if it's a day where you're having a lot of sun, and if you haven't had any rain for a while, then you definitely need to make sure that you go out and you water your pincushion. And then finally, I'm going to talk about these annual plants, the lobelias. And if you look at the flowers look like little snapdragons. They are so cute. And these come in either blue, or they come in purple, they come in white, and this is an annual. The reason I stress this, there is a lobelia that is a perennial. The annuals are not native to the United States. The perennial is native to the United States, but it's a totally different flower. It's also known as the cardinal red flower. Like the namesake lobelia here, it is also deer resistant, the cardinal flower. But again, don't confuse the two. These plants are wonderful in pots. These plants are erect, but there's also some that cascade, so they work beautifully in hanging pots as well. They do need moisture. So if they're in hanging pots, be sure to You may need to water it maybe twice a day if it's a windy day or a sunny day. And the wind whips out the water a lot faster than sun will actually dry up a pot. So this is something to consider. And finally, the final plant that I'm going to talk about today is a native plant. And this plant is a perennial. It is called an Astilbe. An Astilbe is a shade plant, but it'll do well in the sun as well. It needs a lot of moisture. Some people also consider it a woodland plant. And it just has these incredible leaves, just beautiful leaves. And then it has this flower, and the flowers are the spikes. And some are white, some are dark. This one is like a burgundy maroon color. And then actually the most favorite for a lot of people are your pastels, your pinks. And this can get anywhere up to 3 feet tall. So this can be a tall one. There are some that are, I've never seen them, some that are like 3 inches. And butterflies and moths love it. Just make sure you divide it every 4 years. So there are more plants than people realize when it comes to deer resistant or deer less eaten that you can grow in your garden. Once again, we only covered a few of the annual and perennial plants available. If you're not sure if a particular plant is deer less eaten, just contact me at misty@burkenursery.com. I'm your host, Misty Kuceris, and I'd like to thank you for spending your time with me here at Gardening with Burke Nursery. I'm looking forward to helping you grow your garden.
Funding for this program is made possible by Burke Nursery and Garden Center in Burke, Virginia. You'll find trees and shrubs, perennials and annuals, water garden supplies, houseplants, and bird and gardening supplies. Burke Nursery also provides landscape, plant diagnostic, and installation services, and much more. For more information, you can check out their website or call 703-323-1188.